Welcome to this very special edition of the Author's Voice with KAJ, a show where we explore the stories behind the stories. Here we dive into the worlds created by authors, discover their inspirations, and ensure that you walk away enriched and inspired. And today we have with us author Daryl Dittmer, and we'll be talking about his book, When I Stop Fighting. We'll learn about his story from he himself. Welcome to the show, Daryl.
Thank you, KJ. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome once again to KJ Masterclass, this time on the author's voice with KJ Daryl. So my first question is to understand a bit about your story, your journey, your life, so that people know who they are. Audience. Also, how does this culminate in you becoming an author? Also, your journey towards becoming an author.
Well, it's I guess what I needed to do when I was younger in my life was I needed to figure some things out. I was mired in addiction. And that started around the age of 13. And I grew up in a family that was hardworking. My dad was a mechanic. He was a Navy veteran. So he was a pretty tough guy. My mom was a pretty tough person. So all of these things sort of culminated in me just not feeling like I was getting this whole life thing. I wasn't happy. I was insecure. I couldn't look people in the eye. I always felt like I was failing. And so I turned to drugs and alcohol, and that went on. I was fortunate that it was sort of a short stint. And it culminated around the age of 19. But when I was 18, toward the end of my 18th year, my parents confronted me, and it was more or less an intervention. And they said they wanted me to go talk to a drug and alcohol counselor. And that was a really difficult time for me because on the one hand, I wanted to be the son who wasn't causing trouble. I wanted to live up to what they wanted me to be. And then on the other hand, I couldn't live up to what they wanted me to be because I didn't have what I needed internally to do that. And I didn't have the self-esteem and the self-confidence and the self-worth. And so long story short, I ended up going into drug and alcohol treatment at the age of 19 for 30 days. And there was something in there that showed me that there were people who had gone through similar things that I had, and now they were happy, and now they wanted to pursue life, and they wanted to be different, and I wanted that. And so I stayed sober, and I stayed clean, and I've been sober ever since. And the reason that I wrote my books, and especially the first book, is because I wanted to help other people who were in a similar situation. And I wanted them to hear my story from my perspective, because I believe stories help, and they plant seeds, and they, maybe it's one idea that helps someone achieve something different so that they can change their life.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that, Daryl. And so now let's talk about your book itself. Here it is, When I Stop Fight. And then there is the. So I want to understand, means normally people, tell us a bit about that. Normally people say about fighting. Here you talk about stopping fighting. Tell us a bit, help us understand what is this book about. You told, but I don't want to guess anything. I want you to tell your story. If I understand, this is your memoir.
I appreciate that. Yes, it is. And so I had a mentor of mine when I was 19 years old, and I grew up in, I was a fighter, and not necessarily other people, but fighting problems, fighting issues, fighting myself, wrestling with no pain, no gain, all of those things that they tell us. And if you're not hurt if you haven't broken a bone, or if you don't need stitches, you're not really hurt. So just fighting everything, trying to believe that some of the difficult things aren't happening and fighting against them. And so I had a mentor of mine say to me, as he watched me wrestle with life and wrestle with my problems, he said, Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops. And that was the battle. I started to look within, and I started to understand that my battle is with me. My battle is with not feeling like I'm good enough, with not feeling like I'm the right person within myself. And that's been a lifelong experience for me. We get sober. The first thing I had to fight and get rid of was the drugs and alcohol. But then I had to figure out Daryl. I had to figure out me. And I had to change the way I looked at things. I was brought up in a religious household, and I had to look at that. I was brought up to believe certain things about life, and I had to look at all those things, and I had to open myself up to changing the way that I was looking at things. And really, that's when I ask people that have read my book, and people that are curious about my book, what do you think the fighting is about? And what do you think who are we fighting? And I would say about 20% of the people say myself. But the answer is in finding out where we're fighting ourselves, and trying to lessen that fighting, and help that fighting to abate and to go away. And that opens the door for a peaceful and contented and fulfilling life on this planet. At least that's what I've found.
Absolutely, absolutely. So book writing is not an easy thing. Means how did you get down to writing a book about yourself? It can take you back to so many memories, so many things that one would normally want to. Some things you want to remember, some things you don't want to remember, and reliving those may everyone doesn't like that. So tell us about your writing process. How did you get to write? What were the major challenges you faced? Help us understand. How much time did it take? And who is this book for?
Well, it started probably 20 years ago, and I've been clean and sober about 40 years. So about 20 years ago, I met my now wife, and I was telling her stories about my youth and about my past, and the issues that I faced, and the problems, and all of those things, and some of the things that I did, which I wasn't a great guy. And she looked at me, and she said, Daryl, that's not you. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. And I said, well, it was. And then I said, remind me to write a book someday. And so every once in a while she'd remind me, and we talk about it. And over the next 18 years, I probably wrote about 3 paragraphs, and that was about it. So I wasn't committed. I wasn't, people ask me, how do you write a book? And I say, well, you just got to sit down and write. And I truly, truly believe that, because once I decided, and we moved, we changed some things in our lives. We had, some business things that we had to deal with, and we moved to a new place, and which is where we live now. And I thought, you know what? I don't have all the busyness that I had. I don't have all the time encumbrances that I had. And I decided I was just going to write a book. And so I sat down, and literally I would write from, I'd get up at 3:00 in the morning, have a bunch of ideas. And it wasn't an alarm clock. I would just get up because I had ideas. I'd go up to my office, and I'd start writing, and my wife wouldn't see me till noon, or something like that. And she knew what I was doing, and that I was writing, and that sort of thing. But it was just a focus. And as I remembered stories, I started to remember other stories. And it was so healing. It was incredibly healing, because I've always been a fan of writing. Behind me are actually, they're over this shoulder, journals. And I'm a big fan of writing because it is so healing and because it is a way to cleanse ourselves. And that's what writing my first book was. It was a cleansing and it was a remembering, but it was also, it was just a beautiful process because of the wonderful things that I was able to think about. And some of them weren't wonderful things, some of them there were things that I did that I didn't feel good about, but they're in the past and there's nothing I can do about them now. So, that was just part of the process. So it took me about 2.5 to 3 months to write my first book. And that was, it just came out of me. It like it was in there and it just needed to come out. And all I needed to do was sit there and let it come out. And that's what happened. And then I went into my second book. And my second book took another 2 or 3 months because there was more in there. And my wife said to me, she said, there's more in there. You got to keep writing. So I did. And the second book spilled out of me as well. But anybody who's thinking about writing or wanting to write, please just go write. Set aside some time and just go write. And it's an amazing process. Who is this book for? This book is for anyone that's struggling, anyone who feels unsure or scared, or that they're having issues and they don't feel good about life and they want things to be different. I have a recent review where somebody wrote, if you're looking for a book that makes you feel like you can do anything, this is the book. And that really makes me feel good because I want it to help other people. And that's the reason that I wrote it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, in terms of when you were writing this book, any unexpected insight that that the book revealed about yourself, about your journey, anything that you remember? Because we remember so many things.
I've been living a life for a long time where I value how I treat my body, how I treat my mind, how I treat my heart, and how I treat my soul. And I've valued those things for a long time. And I've surrounded myself with people who also value those things. And I've had to move some people out of my life that don't value those things. I think it was more of because it was a very enlightening experience, but it showed me that I was on the right track and that I was moving my life in a direction that was not only good for me, but also good for other people. There's a lot of people that want to change the world, but they don't start in here. And I think the way to change the world is we all start in here and we make ourselves better. And then we're giving something to the world and a better person to the world. And I'm a firm believer in that. So these are the kinds of things that writing the books brought out in me and just sort of solidified what I believe about life and what I believe about our time on this planet with whomever we're with and how we can benefit others as we benefit ourselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. Daryl, what was the most challenging part of writing this particular?
The most challenging part of writing was thinking about writing and not writing. So once it's like everything else in life, right? There's these things, there's these mountains, and we're looking at the mountain and we're saying, wow, that's a really tall mountain. I don't know if I can climb it. But then we just think about it and we go to the next day and we say, wow, that's a really tall mountain. I don't know if I can climb it. And we keep doing that and doing that. And finally, we walk up to the mountain and we decide, I'm going to climb it. And that's really, for me, that's all it was. It was deciding to climb the mountain. And that's a lot of what my second book is about, quite honestly, is when we come to these crossroads in our lives, what are we going to do? And how are we going to move forward, and how are we going to handle those things? And you know, it really is, I think, about taking those risks and climbing those mountains. And once we start, I am fascinated by how the help seems to come. And, you know, you can call it universe or source or God or whatever you want to call it, but the help comes once I start. And so the hard part was looking at what I needed to do. The easy part was starting to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking about your second book, this one is When I Stop Fighting. Second one, if I understand, is When You Stop Fighting. What's the difference between that two? These two books. That second book, who is that book for?
So When You Stop Fighting, and this is what that one looks like. Similar colors, but a white cover. It is about our journey. It is about what we want from this lifetime. It's about our wish list. I feel like everybody wants happiness and contentment, great relationships, peace of mind, meaning or purpose, and some financial security. And you know, not everybody wants all of those things to the same degree, but I think everybody, you know, that's kind of a basic list of, I think, what people want and what would give them a great life on this earth. And so the question is, how do we get there? And the question is also, what's stopping us from getting there? And so once we can see what's stopping us, how do we move forward? And what does that journey look like? And can we have a life beyond our wildest imagination? And my answer is yes, we absolutely can. But we have to go inside, and we have to look at ourselves. And that's really what my second book is about. My first one is my journey and what it took for me to live a life that I wanted to live. And it is a journey. It took time. The second book is trying to help other people on that journey and leaving some breadcrumbs to be able to follow that journey. I actually, there's a recent review on my second book, which I think is, it made me very, very happy. But the person said, refreshingly free from self-help jargon, which I loved, because there's so many things out there that say, oh, you have to do this and you have to do that and you have to do that and you have to say all the right words and that sort of stuff. And mine, I'd say, is a little more practical, a little more real life sort of a book. So I'm happy about both, and I know they've both been helping people, because I get that feedback and it makes me very happy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anything else in terms of books that you are writing on? The second book is out. Anything else that you want people to know about that you are doing?
Yes, well, I do have a podcast, which is called When I Stop Fighting, the podcast. I'm going to have you on someday, KJ. But you know, that really is about us talking about some of the fights we have and some of the battles and where we battle ourselves and ways to alleviate those battles. So I do that. I've outlined book 3. I'm not ready to start writing it yet, but as my sponsor or mentor told me, Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops. The title of my third book is going to be The Fighting Stops, and it's going to be about the beauty of life and how do we get there, the paradox between where we start and what we're told and what we're taught, and maybe the difference between where we might end up in life and how do we move to that place, and how do we deal with some of those paradoxes. So I'm excited about that. I'm not ready to write it, because I'm not ready to get up at 3:00 in the morning and write all day. I have to rest for a little bit, and you know, and then I'll tackle those things.
Absolutely. So, with all this experience of life, you talk about that life can be, life can constantly be rewritten, improved, and experienced in a meaningful and joyful way. Sometimes, people think it's too late. I'm 50, I'm 55, 60, and that there is no meaning into it. Well, I want to understand that meaning of that belief that you have got. What would you like to tell them with all the experience of life that you've got?
Life is, I have learned that life is such a beautiful thing. And I used to, when I was younger and I had issues and I was dealing with the battles and the fighting and all that stuff, I would say things like, "Oh man, what's going to happen next?" You know, and just kind of drag my head and put my chin down and it's been a long, long time since I've said those words, but I used to say those words. And through working on myself and changing what's going on in here, now I say, I can't wait to see what happens next because life can be a wonderful journey. I'm 59 years old. And I truly feel like whenever I go, I go. And that's just part of the journey. And that's completely okay. But until that time, I'm going to enjoy my life. And I truly am. And I feel like at this point, I'm just getting started. And I know it sounds crazy, but it's true because there's just so much out there. And there's whatever is out there, there's 1,000 more times of things in here for me to experience. And you put those two things together and it can translate into an absolutely beautiful life.
Absolutely, absolutely. I fully agree with you. It's a beautiful life indeed, Daryl. So, what are the key message insights you want readers to take away from your book? When I stop fighting, when you stop fighting, and the third one that is about to come.
You know, it and it goes kind of back to the last question, KJ, a little bit. People need to understand that we bloom from wherever we're planted, and we can move forward from wherever we are in our lives, and age doesn't have anything to do with it unless we decide not to. The only thing that stops us from moving forward and having a different life is if we decide not to. And so I think there's an aspect of my life that I have to stay constant in the belief that, you know what, things can get much better from here. Things can keep going. My life can, I don't want to get stuck in a certain spot. I want to keep moving forward and I want to keep experiencing and I want to keep doing and I want to keep helping. And I feel like if we treat life with that perspective, that I want to keep moving forward and helping and doing, and life will never stagnate. Life will never get to be too much because we're continually uh, allowing it to be better.
Absolutely, absolutely well explained. There is much to learn from you about all this from you, Daryl, about life, about fighting and fighting back by stopping fighting in different ways. People that can understand, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to learn from you, learn about you, learn about your journey through your memoir, through your second book, and also perhaps your third book. What is the best way for them to do so?
The best way to find my books is on Amazon. And you can type in either When I Stop Fighting or When You Stop Fighting or my name, Daryl Dittmer, and the books will show up on Amazon. I also have a website, which is daryldittmer.com, where I actually sell those journals. I keep pointing over the wrong shoulder. It's funny. I sell those journals and I sell signed hardcover books on my website as well. But anything on my website, I want to say people who have joined this podcast, KJ, will get a 15% discount if they put the word podcast at checkout. So at checkout, put in the word podcast and get a 15% discount. So Amazon and my website are the best two places to find me.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the Author's Voice with KJ. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, KJ.